There's going to be another significant milestone, which is to have a suit where you can be in like the vacuum of space with just nothing at all.
It's all over the news. Elon Musk reveals a terrifying discovery during Spacewalk. But was there even a spacewalk?
This is the first time in half a decade that we've had a spacewalk happen without the aid of an airlock.
And what exactly did the mission find in the deep of space? Why not join us as we explore the space world, revealing all that you need to know about the most recent and record-holding space exploration, the Polaris Dawn Mission, the shattered record. In order to understand Elon's discovery, we have to understand the point of the mission, to break records. So we have to go back to the original record-breaking mission. Back in 1966, on September 4th, the Gemini 11 mission was a huge success. More than anyone else, astronaut Pete Conrad, the commander of NASA's Gemini 11 mission, was the most enthusiastic of all. He mentioned that the experience was the biggest thrill of his life, and of course, that's understandable.
The United States is a nation of explorers. It's something that fundamentally appeals to our psyche.
What do you expect from a person who climbed to a record orbital altitude of 853 miles? 33 years later, the world said goodbye to Conrad, but his altitude record would stand for another 25 years. And now, Conrad's record has just been shattered. Immediately, Falcon 9 launched the Crew Dragon spacecraft into an elliptic orbit.
2, 1, ignition, full power, and liftoff. Crew 9.
It stayed in an orbit of 1,200 kilometers, but Dragon had other plans. It raised its orbit later in the first day of the mission to an apogee of 1,480.1 kilometers. At this point, it was confirmed that the Polaris Dawn mission broke the record of the highest altitude on a crewed Earth orbital mission and the highest altitude by any crewed mission since the Apollo 17 mission to the Moon in 1972. However, after about 6 orbits, Dragon lowered itself to about 720 kilometers to accomplish other objectives of the mission.
Over Australia, the command pilot executed his terminal phase maneuver, burning at 141 feet per second.
The spacewalk. During the mission, something controversial happened. A spacewalk. Except, it wasn't really even a walk at all. The spacewalk was important to the mission because experts believe that someday, humans would need another planet to live on. To safely transport humans to this new planet, it is crucial to understand the conditions of the space, hence the need for a spacewalk. However, this particular action has led to controversies after the mission crew broadcasted their activities live from space. In a video from the Polaris Dawn mission, it shows the commander in charge outside the hatch, but he didn't completely leave or walk in space. However, a spacewalk, also known as an extravehicular activity, or EVA for short, is a period of activity an astronaut spends outside a spacecraft. This explanation doesn't sound like they necessarily have to walk around space, since they can't be totally detached from the craft. I mean, how are they going to walk in the middle of space anyway? There's no surface for them to put their feet on. To get clarity, let's look at an example of another spacewalk. The first spacewalk was carried out on March 18th, 1965. That day, Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov did a spacewalk at the height of the space race.
Okay, I'm separating from the spacecraft.
Okay, separate from the spacecraft this time. All right.
The space race was a 20th century competition between the US and the USSR over who could conquer space exploration first. In the end, Leonov's walk lasted 10 minutes. Of course, Leonov was completely out, but it doesn't change the fact that both spent time out of their hatch. Today, spacewalks have taken a different level. They are usually done outside the International Space Station and can last between 5 and 8 hours. On top of that, they are not done just for the sake of doing, but for several important reasons. These include carrying out scientific research, observing how space environments impact different things and humans, testing and repairing equipment, and more. While spacewalk sounds like just taking a walk in the park, it is much more difficult. This is because of the difference in environment, which is why astronauts need spacesuits and rope-like tethers for safety. This equipment keeps the astronauts from floating away into space, thereby ensuring their safety. One other way to ensure safety is to wear a simplified aid for EVA rescue known as SAFER for short. It is that tool that looks like a backpack but is far from your regular backpack. It consists of small jet thrusters to help an astronaut move around in space and is controlled by a small joystick. Astronauts all over the world may just have to say goodbye to carrying excessive loads with them to space. This is because technology is fast rising, and scientists have not stopped engaging in game-changing space explorations like the Polaris Dawn mission. On this mission, the spacewalk was scheduled to happen on the third day. When it was time for the spacewalk, all crew members put on their spacesuits and then let out every air in the capsule. It was a risky operation, but in the end, they were able to achieve the goal of the mission and proceeded with other experiments they had to perform. The Polaris Dawn Mission. This mission, like many others before it, comes in a series and with even a terrifying discovery that will soon be revealed. The Polaris Dawn Mission is the first of 3 testing and development missions under the Polaris program. It was not a sole mission, but jointly executed by Jared Isaacman and Elon Musk's SpaceX.
First non-professional astronaut to walk in space in partnership with Elon Musk's SpaceX.
The mission's aim is to develop new technologies to help bring people to Mars, which has been one of Elon's main goals with SpaceX. Initially, the launch into space was scheduled for August 28 this year. However, it was delayed due to a helium leak. But even after the helium issue was resolved, the launch was further postponed due to bad weather around Florida. Eventually, the launch was set to happen on September 10, 2024, and here's the plan. The crew are expected to travel in SpaceX's Dragon capsule and aim for a height that no one has ever reached. Reaching this height only means that the Polaris Dawn mission will be well into the inner band of the Van Allen radiation belts. These are the highly radioactive regions in space that encircle the Earth, and they begin at around 1,000 kilometers altitude. After the record was achieved, the capsule dropped to a lower orbit for the rest of the mission. Of the 4 crew members, only 2 of them left the capsule for the spacewalk. The remaining 2, however, remained in the capsule to manage the safety tethers and observe readings to ensure that everything went well. Apart from beating a record and walking the space,
it's the first all-civilian team to complete a spacewalk.
Another aim of the mission is to test spacesuits. The suits were developed by SpaceX for this mission and future ones. They are equipped with cameras and heads-up features that show the astronauts what's up with their suits outside their vehicle. For more context, the International Space Station has an airlock that allows the overall outpost to remain pressurized when astronauts venture out into space, while Dragon has just a hatch that opens up to space. This means that the SpaceX suits must be able to function well in such conditions to allow for exploring other parts of space in the future. Once the astronauts are done spacewalking, the hatch will be closed and the capsule will be depressurized. Still, on the mission, the crew will conduct about 40 scientific experiments, which include obtaining X-ray images without using an X-ray machine. All that they planned to use was natural showers of radiation in space. The mission also aimed to test-drive a device that can collect and integrate measurements of health, including blood pressure, heart rate, respiration rate, and temperature. The same technology also provides ultrasound imaging and larynx and throat-focused video camera capabilities. It also includes an experimental telemedicine feature that could help diagnose crew members in near real time.
It's a scary thing to be launching people, and the risk is never zero.
The plan was to test this technology by comparing vital sign collection from the device with data gathered from standard periodic health status exams. That's not all. The technology's telemedicine feature will be using SpaceX's Starlink communication system to connect with doctors and specialists on Earth. And this will also lead to a communication test using Starlink. During the test, the device will attempt to offer an appropriate diagnosis based on crew inputs and available documentation. Over the years, one thing that has been common with humans traveling to space is motion sickness. This is why this mission also aims to understand and prevent the motion sickness experienced by many astronauts in space. The crew members are to describe their symptoms, talk about their interventions, how to stop them.
One path is we stay on Earth forever, and then there will be some eventual extinction event.
And if their approach ever helped. Apart from the above mentioned, the crew members are also to participate in different health studies on behalf of the NASA-funded Translational Research Institute for Health, called TRISH. The aim is to set a new baseline for collecting standard health data on commercial space flights. This will complement the datasets routinely collected from NASA astronauts and missions. They are to provide data about how spaceflight affects mental health as well as physical health. This will be achieved through different medical tests and scans to be completed before, after, and during the mission. The test will include the assessments of behavior, sleep, bone density, eye health, and cognitive function. In addition, it will capture the analysis of blood, urine, and respiration. Before now, space communication has relied on signals from ground infrastructure, but SpaceX's Starlink satellite network promises laser-based communication. This will allow for smooth communication between humans in space and humans on Earth. This communication will also be tested to know if it works just fine. And once they are back on Earth, the crew members will be surveyed to determine whether they experienced any injuries or discomfort. Now, the mission, which started on September 10th, has been concluded, bringing back to Earth a lot of amazing discoveries.
This is a crucial step, getting people back to orbit again. Knock on wood, I think probably success is high, but it is not 100%.
Associated risks. This is the part where it all becomes terrifying. As the capsule soared above the South Pacific, crew member Jared could be heard saying the space looked like a perfect world. It seemed like peace compared to the chaos of Earth. Moving on, the crew was in a pressure chamber for 2 days. There, they tested out techniques to make their work more efficient and to prepare for the usual fluid shifts in space that all astronauts encounter. Fluids tend to migrate into the upper body and face and away from the lower body, temporarily creating a puffy face syndrome among new arrivals to space. In order to ensure the safety of the astronauts, they were equipped with a set of high-tech gear to track how their bodies would adapt and evolve during their 5-day space mission. They have a contact lens that measures the internal pressure of the eye for extended periods. Scientists are still working to better understand the mechanisms behind the eye changes. But for now, they can only hope that the space is safe for hundreds and thousands of people to live in for a long time. The astronauts also used an endoscope with a camera attached. This is designed to go into the nostril and examine the airway for inflammation or other stuff. This is to check for anything that may induce balance issues that astronauts face when they return to a gravity environment. Before landing, the astronauts used a tool to see how they reacted to balance issues. This tool was used to shoot electricity between the inner ears to simulate disorientation and teach more rapid adaptation skills. However, to really look into the long-term effects of spaceflight on health, such as loss of muscle and bone mass, we need a longer duration mission. With what we have now, it is clear that the body adjusts to a baseline within a few days or a few hours. This can really differ when it comes to long missions. In addition to balance issues, they can experience space motion sickness when they enter or leave a microgravity environment. Although it is not yet known why motion sickness in some people is more severe than in others, astronauts experience this from time to time. As scary as that may sound, what's more serious is being impaired immediately after a launch or landing event. Another major area of health is the relationship between different factors in spaceflight and how they affect each other. Factors such as microgravity, radiation, exposure, isolation, or confinement tend to affect astronauts too. Thankfully, the crew members were safe on this mission, and they still managed to care about the Earth by sending kisses from space. But before then, it was time for the spacewalk.
This is the first time in half a decade that we've had a spacewalk happen without the aid of an airlock.
As discussed earlier, the hatch was opened and Jared made way for outer space. With the help of the cameras on board, we can see his silhouette waist-high at the hatch. Beneath him was the Earth, but we can see his activities straight from the Earth. How amazing! Jared can be seen turning from side to side and flexing his limbs. After Jared was done, he was replaced by Gillis, who repeated similar motions as Jared. While this was going on, Poteet and Anna were inside the Dragon capsule, but were also exposed to the vacuum. They were performing mobility and transmission tasks, as well as supporting Gillis and Jared. Firstly, it was discovered that none of the crew experienced severe symptoms related to space travel. As mentioned earlier, these symptoms can include acute motion sickness that can prove fatal in extreme cases due to pressure differences. Thankfully, none of them experienced that. As planned, the crew conducted several experiments. It includes inter-satellite laser communication between the spacecraft and SpaceX's Starlink satellite constellation. This experiment proved successful as the crew was able to send back to Earth a high-resolution video of Gillis playing Rey's theme by Star Wars composer John Williams on the violin. That's not all. The crew was also able to connect with kids from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital from the Dragon. And surprisingly, Anna Menon's husband and kids were also present in the hospital. Anna was able to send her kids Kisses from Space by Cosmic reading the book she co-authored to them. She wrote the book Kisses from Space to remind her children of how much she loves them even when they are apart. Before reading the book to the kids, Anna showed off her zero-gravity skills, which undoubtedly fascinated everyone present. Afterward, the 4 astronauts on the Polaris Dawn crew answered some questions from the children. While that would have made the kids happy, it is also a
higher and higher we rose through the sky. Who knew that a dragon could fly up so high?
fundraising effort. The Polaris Dawn mission isn't complete with raising funds for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The mission's video and musical performance is a bid to help raise awareness and funds for the hospital's important work. Back when Inspiration 4 was launched, it pulled in over $250 million for the hospital. Although it is not clear how much this mission will pull for the same cause, it is expected to be more. This is because Anna said in an interview earlier this year that they would be adding proceeds from her book sales this time. In the future, SpaceX plans to announce how much money was raised through its latest mission after the astronauts are back on land. At this point, the charitable sector would always wish for Jared to keep seeking adventures. This is because every time he indulges his passion for aviation, a prominent charity joins the ride. Back in 2009, it was Make-A-Wish who got funded tens of thousands of dollars via Jared's mission. On his last trip, he upped the ante. He led the first all-civilian trip to space, accompanied by a physician assistant, a community college professor, and a data engineer. Jared paid for the SpaceX flight and also commanded it. He then vowed to donate more than the cost of the flight to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Elon Musk donated $55 million, while Jared and his wife, Monica, personally donated $125 million. That's not all. Many others contributed to giving, and it eventually amounted to over $243 million. The return. On September 15th, 2024, the Dragon capsule splashed down near Dry Tortugas in the Gulf of Mexico, Florida. Usually, SpaceX is not known to use this location, but things changed this time because poor weather conditions had delayed the launch for about 2 weeks. Before they landed, a recovery team had been put in place to receive them. Once they landed, the capsule was lifted from the water and onto the recovery vessel half an hour later. The medical team checked the 4 crew members immediately, and the next thing everyone present saw was a smiling and waving Anna Menon. After Anna came Sarah Gillis, then Poteet, before Jared Isaacman. A few days later, Jared was interviewed and asked about what he did immediately when he landed. According to him, the crew had not really eaten or slept, so he grabbed a cheeseburger to eat soon after he landed. Although Jared had claimed that the space was peaceful, he said in the interview that the feeling he had there was not peaceful, but threatening. He also explained why he and Gillis were moving their limbs and body the way they did. It was all because it is difficult to achieve such movements in a normal spacesuit. According to him, when you pressurize up to 5.2 psi, everything becomes stiff and rigid. This is the reason astronauts get shoulder reconstruction surgeries after they land. Undoubtedly, astronauts have one of the biggest tasks in the world, and thanks to their bravery, we have seen the significance of these space missions over time. But still, people have argued about the real purpose of space missions. While some have argued that these missions increase access to space, some have said they are just vanity trips. This is because the number of people who have gone to space is dominated by billionaires like Jared Isaacman. Although Jared is only the 264th person to perform a spacewalk since 1965, it is still believed that a few common men have been given a chance out there. With SpaceX's Gillis being the 265th person, there have been talks about Jared sponsoring the trip and choosing the people on that spacecraft. The truth is that more and more wealthy passengers are pumping in huge sums to travel to space and experience a few minutes of weightlessness, while some have spent tens of millions to stay in space for days or even weeks. It is not clear why there's an argument about the passengers of a space mission excluding representatives of the general public. But it seems logical to select astronauts who are healthy enough to withstand the physical challenges of spaceflight. There have also been discussions about the race of people who have gone to space. And with that in question, there have been efforts to diversify the International Astronaut Corps. Recently, the European Space Agency selected its first disabled astronaut for training, showing that the public is heard. However, it still doesn't change that the people flying on space agency missions are a very limited slice of the human population. The concern is that the only data available on spaceflight health outcomes are related to this small group. Critics have claimed that to date, commercial astronauts have been primarily, although not exclusively, white men, and before now, no woman had been there. This is to say that diversifying in future commercial missions could help widen the pool of data on human health in space. For example, the Polaris Dawn crew consists of an equal balance of men and women, which allows for comparisons between genders. However, if other categories of humans are not included, we may never have data on them. Currently, Trish is making moves to collect data from a wider range of people, not just highly trained young astronauts with no medical conditions, to see how people with pre-existing conditions like diabetes or cardiovascular disease fare on space missions. With all said, one thing remains certain: space missions will change the world for the better and also help humanity greatly. One good example is the diagnostic device used by astronauts in space. It would be great if they could make plans to teach non-medical professionals to use the devices and make them available. If it can be useful in space, it would be useful in rural areas or regions where there is no access to doctors. That way, more lives can be saved. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.